Okay, DCA students, this is the recap for the Origins of English lecture, part one. Okay, going to keep it very brief, but I may introduce some new stuff at the end of it, so be very attentive. Okay, we started off by talking about where does English come from? Well, you got to go way back, right? You got to go all the way back to languages that precede English, and the theory is, it's a pretty good theory, that there was originally a sort of a great-great-grandfather language of almost all of the European languages and a lot of Middle Eastern and Eastern languages. And we don't really know what the name of that language is, even if it had a name, but we just nicknamed it Proto-Indo-European, or Indo-European for short. And we think it came out of this area of the Russian steppes, the Ukraine there, and that these people that lived at who knows how long ago, thousands of years ago, traveled by horse both east and west, spreading their language, their culture, all of that kind of thing. And if you look at the bottom there, the language family of Indo-Europeans goes over to Indic, which is Indian, Hindi, Bengali, Nepali, Sanskrit. Germanic is the branch that English comes off of, and so its cousin languages are Danish and German as well. And then you've got Italic and Celtic and Hellenic, which is Greek, Slavic, which is Russian. So we think all of these modern languages go back in time up the tree branches till you get to the great granddaddy language, which we kind of have to construct hypothetically. Okay, so that video I asked you to listen to, it's somebody's hypothetical, but it's probably not too far off. I don't know. We'll see. But we don't have recordings, obviously. But English starts with what we think was Proto-Indo-European. And then after that, we know that in the British Isles from about 500 BC to about 300 AD, 3 to 400 AD, 3 to 400, it was mostly occupied by Celts, okay, who spoke Gaelic. And we talked about the fact that the Celtic civilization, there wasn't like a Celtic country, but the Celtic civilization stretched all the way from Ireland, way up here, down to what is today Spain, all the way across this part of Europe, even in parts of Turkey. And we talked about the book of Galatians was actually written to people living in Galatia, which is in Turkey, and these people would have been descendants of Celts, believe it or not, Celts. Now, they probably all spoke Greek at that time, but they were Celts. They were Celtic. Ethnically, they were Celts, and civilization-wise, they were Celts. And this civilization, about you can kind of use a rough ballpark, kind of like 500 BC to AD 500, about 1,000 years there. But see this little red area down here? The Romans. They were little back in 500 BC, but by the time of Christ, all of this territory was pretty much taken over by the Romans. And the Romans didn't come in and replace Gaelic as a language, but they did layer their own Latin on top of it. So what you had was upper class people spoke Latin because they had government positions or they were in the military or whatever. And your common peasants spoke the local language, whatever that happened to be. And in this case, in the British Isles, it was still Gaelic. Okay. And so after that, there's the Roman Empire, right? And the Romans took over pretty much most of this area that we see as England and Wales. They didn't invade Ireland. They didn't have a very successful attempt at invading Scotland. So those places stayed largely Gaelic. And you can go today to Scotland and to Ireland and also to Wales. And people still speak Gaelic. They've got Gaelic newspapers and Gaelic television shows and things like that. But you can see that because of the Roman Empire, almost all of the Gaelic-speaking world was pretty much replaced over time by other civilizations, because when the Romans came in, they didn't necessarily impose Latin on everybody, but there was a whole lot of mixing around in the empire and a whole lot of travel. And by the time the Roman Empire fell, the Celts were pretty much overrun, just like the Romans were, with other barbarian groups like the Franks and the Goths and the Visigoths and the Ostrogoths and all that kind of stuff. That's another thing. But bottom line is, people were still speaking Gaelic under Roman rule all the way up to about 400, the year 400, 80 that is, AD 400, but with a little smattering of Latin on top, okay? Now, the most important thing we talked about was the fact that when the Romans pulled out of the British Isles, it left those Gaelic-speaking Celts pretty defenseless in the year AD 400 or so, okay? They wrote to people in these parts of Europe, right? Northern Germany and Denmark, and said, hey, we'd like to hire you as protectors. Well, he hired them, and they stayed a while, if you know what I mean. They decided, we're going to move in over here, and we're going to bring Aunt Sally and Uncle Joe and an entire U-Haul full of stuff, and we're just going to take stuff. Now, what they didn't do is they didn't just wipe out the Celts. They didn't do that. But they did push a lot of them out of the way, took a lot of the good land, and frequently, though, they did intermarry with them. So if you look at these parts of England today, down here in Wessex, there's still a lot of Celtic residual, but it's mostly Anglo-Saxon folks. And if you look at people sort of genetically, they are Celtic and Anglo-Saxon and Germanic and some Viking, too, because the Vikings came along later. That's another story. But so it wasn't just like everybody get out. We're taking this place. But it was that the Anglo-Saxons, when they took over, they took the good parts of land, and they took the good farmland, and the Celts became largely servants to them and didn't have their own land. But they still intermarried with them. So you get this hybrid. But the Anglo-Saxon language is a Germanic language, right? So Celtic was Indo-European, yeah. Germanic was Indo-European, yep. And both of those kind of come together and sort of hybridize a little, but it's mostly Germanic. It's mostly Germanic in this period called Old English. And remember, we also read a little bit about the fact that in Old English, we talked a little bit about the fact that in Old English, the most famous work of literature in Old English is Beowulf. And those are the opening lines of Beowulf. I won't read it again for you. It's a real tongue twister. But it has some fun and interesting things. You could pick out a few modern words. In, what, under, him, right? There you go. So there's a few in there that you can. Some of them are a little bit hard to tease out, but oft, as in often, right? That's kind of close. But you wouldn't, if you were in a room with an Anglo-Saxon warrior who was reading Beowulf, he wouldn't read, was reciting Beowulf, you really wouldn't understand each other very well. Okay, so that was Old English. The next period is Middle English. We're going to talk about this in our class. And this is a very important sort of event. I'm going to allude to that. I'm going to tell you why Middle English came about. It came about in 1066 and was for about 1400 is when it started ending, and Modern English started. It's kind of weird for people to think that Modern English is from the year 1400? You mean Shakespeare was a modern English writer? Yeah. But you know, an author that's in this period of time that you've probably heard of before is Chaucer. Now, I read the Old English, and you saw how it was kind of like, sounds like a lot of guttural and stuff. Now listen to the Middle English, and we'll talk in class about why it sounds so different. What happened in 1066 to change that Old English, which was Anglo-Saxon, heavily Germanic, and sounded like all the guttural sounds that I made, right? All that stuff. Now listen to how Chaucer sounds. This is how Chaucer's Canterbury Tales would sound. This is the opening of the prologue. Juan that April with the shorest sota, the drocht of March hath perched to the rota, and bathed every vein in switch liquor, of which virtue engendered is the floor. Oh, well, it sounds different. It's less guttural. It's kind of, it's not a, it doesn't sound harsh and kind of gravelly. It's a little bit more lyrical. Listen to the vowels. Juan that April, with his shore sota, the drucht of March hath perched to the rota. Okay? And then take a look at the Modern English translation. Oh, this looks a lot more like Modern English, right? Juan that April, when fair April, with his showers sweet, right? It's rainy in April, right? Has pierced the drought of March, right? So usually dry in England in March, to the root's feet, right? The drocht of March hath perched to the rota, and bathed each vein, like the plant has veins, right? In liquid of such power, right? Life-giving power. Its strength creates the newly springing flower. Now, the translator took a little liberty to make sure that it rhymed, right? Because the Middle English rhymes, soot, root, liqueur, fleur. So he's trying to keep the spirit of that. So it's a little bit of liberty, but you can see all these words that look very much like Modern English. And although it's a bit of a stretch, if you listen really carefully, you can spot a lot more words that seem familiar. Now, when we get to class, we're going to talk about what brought about this change. How did we go from Old English to Middle English, What happened in 1066? I bet you know. Some of you, I bet you know. We're going to tell a story of that, and then how we get to, ta-da, modern English. Yeah, Shakespeare. He's got some shades on there. He's a modern guy. And now listen to this. Tomorrow and tomorrow and tomorrow creeps in this petty pace from day to day to the last syllable of recorded time, and all our yesterdays have lighted fools the way to dusty death. Out, out, brief candle. Life's but a walking shadow. Listen to that. That's really modern. Now, you don't think of Shakespeare as modern, but that's really, really modern, okay? We're going to talk about how that happened. So we got two big events that we're going to talk about historically. Then we're going to talk about how does English as a language become standardized and why. Okay, so that's where we're going in class tomorrow. Just want to give you this brief recap. Try to keep it to 10 minutes. Thanks very much and good night.